Today, guys, I found a video and it caught my attention. I was like, yeah, this is a topic that used to really bug me. When I was a Muslim, I noticed this a lot in the community. So, we're talking here today about racism in Islam. I found a video of I guess she's a Muslim scholar or a Muslim alim, a female Muslim speaker. So in this speech, she's talking about something which is something that if you've ever been a Muslim and you care about non-racist views, and not being a racist, then maybe you also came across this and it struck you and shocked you as well. I grew up in London, and London, as you probably know, is extremely diverse. Even in my Catholic community, it's diverse. I had friends from all over the world. I'm not saying they weren't racist, but it was deeply looked down on. It was deeply condemned. Trust me, when I moved outside of London, I met racist people who said racist things. When I lived abroad, I saw racism also. But it was always like those people who were racist in the UK, I felt like they kind of knew they were doing it, but they were saying it like behind closed doors because obviously they don't want to get publicly shamed or something. Because here, I feel like the UK is a really tolerant country, even though not people are not perfect. But trust me, because I have lived in another country, I've seen the difference. Here, racism is like in general is looked down on. And then when I became Muslim, I started to hear new types of racism that I had actually never experienced before. I'd call this type of racism outright racism, where people were openly saying things which to me belonged in, 1950s America, and horrendous things, and not just about Black people. Literally, I heard this about all types of people, but mainly I did hear terrible things about people who are like Black or really dark skinned. White people, there was a lot of racism towards them also. I don't know if this was cultural, but it was real, and it got to a point where I was like, the things I was hearing were just shocking. And the things I was hearing weren't just specifically about like white girls, were like really, really bad and degrading, and as I said, just shocking. Because if I had heard people saying that about the opposite way round, I would still be just as shocked. Like if someone said that to me about Muslims, I would still be horrified. But this seemed to be okay. It seemed to be nobody was challenging these beliefs and ideas. So yeah, so when I saw this lady making this video, I wanted to give my own 2 cents as to what I think is going on. Listen to a Muslim scholar speak about it. Let's see what she's got to say, and I'm going to give my reaction. And I want you guys to also, anyone who's been part of this community and who cares about, not discriminating against people, please also share your thoughts about this subject, because I'm sure I am not the only person who's been through this.
So there was a story that I heard about recently, and it really upset me. It was about an African-American Muslim who sent an email to one of the imams in the state of California talking about how he doesn't like to go to the masjid anymore, and that he chooses to actually learn about his deen through cyberspace. Because he said when he goes into a masjid, the immigrant Muslims treat him like a second-class citizen in his own country, and he refuses to be treated like that. And as a result, he prefers to stay home and learn about Islam at home through the computer. And that's a really sad situation. It's something that all of us, subhanAllah, none of us would ever want that to happen to our children. We wouldn't want that to happen to our parents. We wouldn't want that to happen to ourselves. So again, loving for your brother what you love for yourself, that's something that we say, it's a value we talk about. But in the real world, how are we actually implementing this value?
I remember stories like this as well, where like here in London, obviously, like people who are actually immigrants themselves, like cussing out Black people, and like they don't realize that those people are actually British and they're born here, and they they've done nothing wrong, they're just existing, but they would target them and they would say horrible things about them without even knowing them. And I was like, where on earth is this coming from? Like, what the hell? And also, I mean, as I said, not just Black people also making horrific generalizing statements about white girls and how basically we're all just Jezebels, not in those words exactly, but that was the vibe. Openly in front of people, just saying this with no pushback. So I can only imagine if you're actually Black and you go to a mosque and there's people like that there, and I can imagine the reaction they'd give you, and they have no awareness of how offensive they're being.
It's not one story, it's actually countless stories, countless numbers of incidences where young Muslims are coming to the imams of the masajid. And it doesn't just have to do with indigenous versus immigrant. That's just one case. But what you have is sometimes Muslims who are either both indigenous or both immigrant, just coming from different races. And their parents will not allow them to get married because they happen to be from a different ethnicity. And this is something, again, that we can't tolerate. This is not a phenomenon that we can continue to watch growing in this country amongst Muslims who come from all over living in America. This is not something we can allow.
So yeah, this was another thing I would hear is like certain people be like, oh, I could never bring home like a Black person, or I couldn't marry a white girl. Like, but what I'm going to say is that I think the thing is, I think definitely a lot of this is cultural. Okay, there's definitely a cultural thing, because it's not just Muslims, it's not just, you know, the Muslim community. There's racism all over the world. There's tribalism all over the world. But I will say, I do feel like Islam puts a lot of emphasis on Muslims being superior. And I do think Islamic theology cultivates a kind of an atmosphere of supremacy where it's not shocking to me that other types of bigotry follow on.
Or the concept of someone being worthy of your children is based on their religion and their character. It has nothing to do with race. And we all know, we've all heard, every Ramadan, we hear the same surah being recited in Taraweeh. We know from Surah Al-Hujurat, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions in the Quran that He created us into nations and tribes so that we may know one another. And He also mentions that the most honorable of us is the most God-conscious, the most God-fearing. So this is the measurement of nobility in Islam. It has nothing to do with race. It has nothing to do with class. And subhanAllah, one of the most amazing stories that I always think about, and all of us can reflect on, is we all know that one of the pillars of Islam is Hajj, is pilgrimage. And we all see what it means to wear the white cloth, and the distinction of class is removed. But there's something even greater than that, and that's when Muslims have to go between the mountains of Safa and Marwa.
But this is what I mean. It's like, so you think there's no discrimination against class and this and that, but there's clearly discrimination against women, against different religions, or to tell women that, you know, we're deficient in intellect. That's pretty offensive. That's pretty bigoted, you know, or to tell gay people that they are wrong for just loving their partner. You know, it's hard to claim a higher moral ground when you're discriminating against those group of people.
Which example are we honoring when we do that? For those who are sexist, you're actually following in the footsteps of a woman. For those who are racist, you're following in the footsteps of an African woman. For those who are classist, you're following in the footsteps of an African woman who was a slave. And that is who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala honored, to the point that every Muslim on this earth is supposed to try to follow in her footsteps and go between Safa and Marwa. Because of what? Because of her God consciousness, because of how she struggled for the sake of God. And, you know, above and beyond that, something I like to think about is this woman, Hajar, was the wife of the Prophet Abraham. She was also the mother of Ismail. And Ismail is the prophet that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ is a descendant of. So the great, 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 great grandmother of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ was an African woman. So if you're going to be racist, you're actually also participating in a form of discrimination against your own prophet. He has African blood that runs through his veins. So subhanAllah, this issue of having a heart that is pure of racism, a heart that is pure of discrimination, is very important to actually having a true faith, a true iman.
So another thing that just sprang to my mind is, yeah, that's all well and good what she's saying, but what about the way Islam speaks about the Jewish community? And Jewish people are a race, are an ethnicity. Yes, it's also a religion, but it's also an ethnic group. So again, it's very hard here to try and claim the higher moral ground when your scriptures contain offensive statements. I would consider them offensive. You know, there is discrimination within the theology. You just can't hide around it. I really think this woman she's got a good intention. There are Muslims like her who are not racist. As I said, I won't deny, I think she's right on one hand. I guess in Islam, there isn't anything that says, you know, be racist to Black people or white people. But there is definitely other forms of discrimination. Yeah, so I guess to conclude, I definitely think a lot of it could be cultural. I do think so, because I've noticed people who are from the same culture but might be different religions sometimes say similar things. So I think a lot of it is cultural. But as I said, I do think there are elements of supremacy in Islam that rub off onto people. But then, being a woman, I could sit here all day and talk about the various forms of discrimination. And let me say, at the end of the day, I'm also against anti-Muslim bigotry myself. Like, I do not think you should discriminate against the Muslim just because they're a Muslim. I think that is also wrong. And I'm against all forms of discrimination. I think you can dislike ideologies. You can, like what I'm doing here, you know, you can discuss ideologies, and because they represent a set of beliefs, they represent ideas and a claim to a certain truth. And I can debate whether that claim is true or not, or if it's valid, or if it's moral. But the people behind it, no, don't treat them badly just based on who they are, because that's no way to carry on in a civilized society. But as I said, I'm just presenting my view on how I feel like there are elements of discrimination found within the theology. So yeah, that's just my 2 cents. Thank you everyone for watching once again. I hope you enjoyed this reaction video, and there will definitely be more soon. And I wish everyone the best.